Welcome to the Legendary Upside podcast. My name is Pat Crane. You can follow my content at legendaryupside.com. With me today, Daniel Racz. We're going to be talking through his latest article for Legendary Upside, talking through or analyzing the potential landmines in this offseason running back group, the veteran running backs who could get blown up by rookie additions. Daniel, how's it going?
It's going good. NBA trade deadline in a few hours. Thought I had the Kevin Durant to the Warriors scoop. Windhorse did confirm that it was going to happen until KD nixed it, but win some, lose some. So feeling good.
I know. We've got our own insider here, Daniel, leaking the KD. You know, there's rumors, but yeah, it didn't quite come to fruition there.
Yeah.
I didn't hear from you about the Luka trade, Daniel. Where were you on that one?
I don't think anyone had the Luka trade. That would have been an incredible pull.
That would have been a pretty big scoop if you got that one. So we're going to be talking through. Now I mentioned that the rookies are probably going to be the ones blowing up the veterans. I guess let's kick off with why we're so focused on the rookies, because we're not very focused on the free agent class. Do you want to do a quick rundown on the 2025 running back free agent class?
Yeah, and I think to frame it, there's an analogy you use. We're talking about like in dynasty drafts, there's like the value of all the players in any given year, but then in year N+1, a certain percent of that value shifts to the upcoming rookie class through those picks. And that year's just everyone who played the year N-1, just their value goes down a bit. And when you think about like the touches for all the players, very few running backs retire. More of them are just phased out due to lack of skill or new, better players coming into the league through the draft. And in the 2025 draft, we have an abnormally strong class by almost any section. When we look at projected first-round picks, we have at least one. We might have two. It would be surprising, but not out of the realm of possibility.
Wouldn't be that surprising to have two.
Yeah, and I think three's even in play, though quite unlikely. And then we'll probably have.
I would say it's like 1% to 2% chance we get three. Yeah.
Yeah, and then when you think about by the end of round 2, we're probably looking at 4 to 6 backs off the board. Then by round 3, it's probably hitting the double digits. And PFF has, I think, 22 in their top 200, which is 3 more than any number they've had in 22, 23, or 24. So a lot of teams are going to be taking running backs. There's also a lot of reports that this general draft class is not good. Nearly across the board, there's at most 2 blue chip talents. Typically, you're in the 3 to 5 range. There's no franchise.
I think it's considered deep. It's not that there's like the tackle class, offensive tackle class is not strong, but the inside line class is strong, and the defensive line class is both impressive at the top and deep.
Yeah,
seems like an okay cornerback class, okay wide receiver class.
I think it's a bad wide receiver class. I think there's a below average, like 30th.
I think we've been spoiled. I think we've had. Wide receiver class used to look a lot like this. We just had a bunch of really good ones in a row. So
yeah,
I mean, you have at least one, like Hunter. Leaving Hunter aside, you have one guy who looks very live for top 10, and then 3 other guys, 2 of which I think will go first round. So it's not terrible.
Yeah, but compared to like 5, 6 wide receivers in the previous years, and I think. Generally,
but that's what I'm saying. That's
normal. But I think the round 2 through 5 are probably definitely below average compared to like the past 10 drafts, probably 20th, 30th percentile based on my understanding. But again, like a 25th percentile draft isn't that much different than the 50th because of all the randomness at play and how many players there are. But I think just that slight decrease in talent makes teams more willing to take these running backs because of how strong every single person has said about this running back class that we'll probably get 20 by the end of round 5 or 6 and probably 25 by the end of the draft. Just something that could break records.
Yeah, and that's obviously going to shake up the landscape in the NFL. We've also, I would say, had some weak running back classes recently. We've had some really strong running back prospects. You get a Bijan. That doesn't come around very often. The Gibbs was an underrated prospect, especially when you factor in his first-round draft capital. But like a lot of the depth of the running back classes hasn't really been there recently. And some of the depth that we thought we had also has not panned out. Like I thought Jonathan Brooks was a good prospect, re-tears his ACL, recovered, never really produces coming off the initial ACL tear. Trey Benson was an interesting prospect, completely buried by James Conner last year. We'll see what happens. But like we haven't had, Bucky Irving came in and was awesome right away. But like if you look at some of the running backs that kind of had a chance to make noise in recent classes, like a Tank Bigsby, Kendre Miller. We haven't really had a ton of hits. So I would say it's sort of two things. The running back classes over the last few years haven't been all that strong. And then you kind of have these like 50-50 type bets. It feels like we've been flipping, the bad side of the coin there for a number of those.
Yeah.
So there is at this point in time a lot of running backs in starting positions who are pretty vulnerable, who are older, who maybe haven't been that efficient, who fell off in efficiency last year, even if they're younger. So there's a lot of vulnerable starters. But again, I do want to just quickly run through the free agent class before we mostly turn our attention to the rookie additions. But we have Najee Harris as kind of the leader of the free agent class. We have Aaron Jones. We've got like Rico Dowdle, Javonte Williams. There's
J.K. Dobbins.
J.K. Dobbins.
Then it's Nick Chubb, Alexander Madison, and that's pretty much the end of the list. It is an exceptionally weak top of the running back class, and the depth is almost non-existent. So the teams that last year, they might, if they wanted to learn the wrong lesson from last year of just, I mean, Saquon unambiguously a smash, Derrick Henry a smash. Those are awesome contracts that those teams got. But if teams then were just like learning the lesson of free agent running backs are a good investment and you should just be overpaying to get that player, it's not really the chance to do that this offseason because maybe you think Najee Harris is worth 10 to 12 million, which is probably a fine price tag for what he can produce. But after that, you're looking at Aaron Jones, $5 to $9 million a year, maybe with like a second year team option.
And he might be done. Like,
yeah,
he just might be done.
and then J.K. Dobbins and Rico Dowdle will probably get like 2-year in name only deals where the second year is a team option where they'll be come week one parts of a backfield. Unless Dobbins is back with the Chargers, then he's probably the 1A to start the year. But it's easy to see those players losing work if they're able to get it at the start of the year. It's incredibly bereft of talent. And that's why I think when Sean Payton in a recent press conference talked about how when these teams are looking at the offseason, they're thinking about what players can we get in free agency that we can't get in the draft? What needs can we only fill in one place? I think we'll see a lot of teams knowing how many running backs are available in the draft. They're like, I wouldn't even need to force a round 2 running back because in round 3 or round 4, I'll have someone I really like, which also complements the fact that there are so few usable backs in this free agent class. So,
yeah, I think so that does push teams to the draft, and I think underlines the point you made earlier that there's going to be a number of running backs drafted highly in this class. We're going to see a lot of running backs drafted overall because I do think the class as a whole isn't particularly strong. I push back a little bit on that it's a super weak class, but it's not a strong overall class, I don't think. And so you get to like round 4, round 5, and there's probably going to be a running back sitting pretty high on your board. The other thing is that as we are, here on February 6th, it's like so obvious which running backs are going to go in which order, right? But it's not going to actually play out like that. And so there's going to be a guy that we're surprised is available in mid round 3. And the team drafting in that spot will also be surprised and, may go ahead and pull the trigger. So because there's not going to be universal agreement on which running back should go in which order, you're gonna have teams that are just like, oh my God, this guy's available in round 4. Like that's just crazy. Like we got to take this guy here, which will create some bad landing spots in our minds, right? Like when teams are taking a running back because we didn't really even plan to at this spot, but he should have been gone 30 picks ago. They may already have someone that we like on the roster, and that's where we should be thinking pretty open-mindedly about which running backs are at risk of having an addition, because it doesn't ever work as cleanly as like, oh, this guy was good last year. They already have like a solid backup, or like, man, they hit on a fifth round pick. They got a starting running back in the fifth round. Obviously, they're not going to draft Bijan Robinson in the top 10. Like, oh no,
Well,
they just did.
I think that one was pretty like clear, not clear to see of, oh, the Falcons are absolutely drafting Bijan, but like the story of Arthur Smith and wanting to create a dominant running game with.
Sure.
But when I think of like 2023 with the Seahawks, Walker's a relative hit in the second round, and then he's what, a 2-3 turn pick in underdog drafts at that point, and then no one really expects the Seahawks to be in play for another major running back head. But again, the second round, which is where Charbonnet was expected to go. But you think the teams that want him in the late second round are the teams that didn't just spend a second round pick on a running back that was at least functional, but possibly much better than that. But boom, Charbonnet goes, then Walker slips like the fifth round in ADP. So there are a lot of players like that where you can try and avoid the premature loss if you're able to parse which teams are the most likely to do it. But again, Seattle's one that when you were looking at in any, like the model I built for this year, if I was to plug that 2022 or 2023 Seattle offseason into it, it probably says unlikely to take a running back that early. So
yeah, we would have. Yeah, I think that's right, because they spent capital on running back. They probably had, I can't remember that at this point, who their running
DJ
back two
Dallas
was. Was it DJ Dallas? Okay, and he was like a fourth round pick, fifth round. He wasn't. They drafted him. It wasn't undrafted or anything. So
yeah, I think it was him and Travis Homer. So again, that wasn't
Yeah.
like a uniquely strong running back 2 and 3, but that is part of the puzzle. It's not just the team looking at their running back 1; it's the entire collection of running backs under contract and for how
Yeah.
long they're under contract. Like Dallas, not by the like third year of your contract. If you're not a productive rookie player, teams will cut you without really any issue. Travis Homer like went to the Bears, I think, after that year, and then like Sam Sherman's been tweeting about him since. And then you look at different teams of, I'm trying to think this year, the Colts are a great example where when I'm thinking about Jonathan Taylor is like clearly set in week 1, the starter on the Colts, but their running back 2 currently is Savon Ahmed, and they have no investment in him. He got no touches last year. The Colts aren't looking at their running game and thinking, well, the 70% of touches we're giving to Jonathan Taylor mean we're kind of immune from thinking about the other 30% of touches or the injury contingency. They need a functional
They need to fill
player.
out a depth chart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe they do
and
that.
This free agent class doesn't really have that. I mean, you could bring in a Rico Dowdle as a backup, very functional backup, but I mean, like a J.K. Dobbins or a Aaron Jones even is kind of like, I mean, you could talk yourself into Aaron Jones behind Taylor, but because of the age, you're like, there's not a lot of depth in this running back free agency class where you would even be excited about, oh, this guy's going to be. I mean, I guess you could talk Jones in as kind of like this year's Eckler or something.
Yeah,
it's like we're going to use him more rotationally, and I guess that would make sense with Taylor, but there's just not really depth in the free agent class, and so I think you turn your attention as an NFL team to some of these kind of more day 3 type of backs. Just to go quickly through the rookie class we have coming in, Ashton Genty is expected to go very high, and is a prospect worthy of going as high as any running back should go. I'll put it that way. I think he's on par with a Bijan, and he will ultimately get, I think, installed as a clear-cut starter. The worst landing spot I've seen projected for him was the Jets by Lance Zierlein going 7th to the Jets. That is obviously a disaster scenario for fantasy in terms of Genty and Breece Hall. I think that, but he would be the starter over Breece Hall there. Like, that's as strong as much as I like Breece Hall, I think Genty would probably displace him, especially as the 7th overall pick in relatively short order. And then Hall would have like a pass catching 1B role, I would think.
Or Hall could get traded. Just new GM.
Or Hall could get traded.
1 year left on the rookie deal. Again, I don't think the Jets take Genty, but in the very small world where the Jets do add a running back with the 7th pick, you're probably getting around 3-ish pick for Hall from a team, and then that team extends Hall and he becomes the starter. So
that's a good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, but that's the level of prospect that Genty is that he's going to go in and take a backfield. He could get limited, like his fantasy production would be pretty limited by the presence of Breece Hall or, like an Achane. That would hurt Genty, but he would be the starter. over those guys. I think he's that level of prospect and that level of commitment in terms of draft capital is likely to come his way. Then you've got Travion Henderson, Amarian Hampton, Caleb Johnson. Hampton has been kind of the most liked by the fantasy community, dynasty and best ball so far. But weirdly, I think he might be the least live to go round one. Caleb Johnson, there's been some buzz about him maybe going round one. The Bears have been linked to him. That would probably be more in the beginning of round two. Travion Henderson is, I believe, going to run very fast to the combine and has started to get some round one buzz as a guy who's probably going to be a better pro than he was a college player. And Todd McShay has been beating that drum, and combine riser seems like a pretty safe bet. For Henderson, he's sufficiently big. He's like 205, 208. He's versatile, can catch passes, breakaway speed. So I think teams are going to be into him. I would be very surprised if he fell out of round two, live to go round one. Potentially is kind of like a 1A or even a 1B to start is in a committee, but will, obviously could just be a clear-cut starter from day one and is going to make another back's life extremely difficult if he goes there. Martin Hampton, kind of a bigger early down hammer, kind of more the David Montgomery if you think of Henderson as more the Jahmyr Gibbs archetype. Johnson, similar to Hampton. Quinshon Judkins, another guy who's very live to go round two. I've seen him falling a little bit more to round three recently, but even as a round three back, Judkins would be a real thorn in an existing starter side. Cam Scatabo, a back with size and pass catching ability, 1.57 yards per route run, which is just behind Ashton Genty, and he ran 18 routes per game over his career. He handled a huge part of his team's backfield. Backfield dominator rating peaked at 79%, a career mark of 67%, which is pretty good. He breaks a lot of tackles. He is like the ultimate try-hard running back. His pass protection is kind of crazy. He like spears guys in the chest, and it's quite bad. But get him out running routes, and he could be a guy who's forming a committee right away with more of an early down guy, and then he's big enough. He's 225 that he could kind of take a job, kind of like maybe a Rashad White type of, but like early career Rashad White, where he's coming in more as a pass catching guy and then kind of takes over a backfield over time. Devin Neal, 220, a guy who could go third or fourth round, probably before the fifth, but he maybe falls there. But I think he's live to go second round, and another versatile back with size. Dylan Sampson is a bit smaller. He's like 200-ish, but he's very fast and can run between the tackles and do all the traditional running back stuff. And then you get to kind of more speculative, or like you're not quite sure what you have at the NFL level. Ollie Gordon, who came off this really poor season this past year, we'll have to see how he tests. And you've got like a deep group of sort of more speculative guys that have started to get buzz a little bit, like LaQuint Allen, Brashard Smith, Trevor Etienne, Bashal Tutin, Raheem Sanders, Jordan James, RJ Harvey, Damian Martinez, Khalil Mullings. There's a bunch of guys that will land places. A number of them will not do anything. Some of them will hit. But some of them will change ADP values on the way, right? So these are guys, it's a deep enough group where you're like, man, a number of these guys are going to create discounts at the very least and potentially impact production. Obviously, not every single guy at the top will hit, but I think everyone from Genty, Henderson, Hampton, Johnson, Judkins, Scatabo, and probably Neal and Sampson create big discounts on the backs that they're paired with. And I think we have, a pretty high hit rate, like a 70% hit rate, maybe 60% hit rate from that group. There's going to be, because Genty I'm counting as damn near 100%. And then I think the rest of the group, we're going to see some backs displaced. So let's go through your article and explain the methodology of kind of how you bucketed these teams by how likely they are to be the ones where some of these rookies land?
Yeah. So to start, I want to try and answer two questions. How good in terms of skill is each team's current running back room? So we were looking at on the rushing side, your PFF rushing grade and the rush yards over expected per game of your top rushers, weighting the starter much more heavily for receiving grade, yards per out run, and then just a little bit of the metric was the PFF blocking grade to try and add that in. Then each team got a composite skill score that then we want to look at how much does each team have invested in their running back room. So that's the contract and associated draft capital of still a rookie contract of your starter and your backup and your third string backs. Like for the Panthers, Miles Sanders, Jonathan Brooks, and Chuba Hubbard, for example. And then looking at combining those, just multiplying them simply to get how good, like the team skill as shown right here. And then below that, the composite of skill and investment. And again, like teams like the Minnesota Vikings, who have 1 year left of Ty Chandler's rookie deal, have in effect zero investment relative teams to like the Detroit Lions, Buffalo Bills. And then the last thing we did when building the investment score, the 2022 running back class is up for extensions now. So that's players like James Cook, Kyron Williams, Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, and Tyler Algier, and Rashad White. Though I think a Rashad White extension before the year is unlikely, but we put the assumptions of the likely contract for each player. And then from all this, we got those composite scores of a team's current running back health, I think is the best way to put it, because it's not just what you've invested, but also the returns on those investments. So you have teams like the Detroit Lions, where Gibbs is multiple years left under contract and surely barring an injury going to get another extension. The Lions wouldn't be thinking about replacing him. They just extended David Montgomery. They just drafted Sion Baki. The Detroit Lions running back room also probably might bring back Craig Reynolds as the fourth, is just completely set in stone. So there are teams like that where just the ADPs will reflect the running back room now, but the running back room now will also be the running back room later. So the room for that landmine type player to come in and really blow up spots is non-existent. And then on the other side, there are running back rooms like the Vikings where nothing is factored in now because the running backs haven't been added. But then there's this huge middle zone of most teams that have some form of decent investment, but could obviously be improved upon if they so chose. And like there are also teams who probably we think improve on their investment, but might not. I think last year with the Dallas Cowboys, Rico Dowdle before the offseason was priced as if the Cowboys were a near lock to add someone in free agency or the draft with a big investment. Free agency came and went. They added no one. Then it was surely his ADP. Like his ADP doesn't move. So surely in the draft, they add someone. And this was why we were so aggressive on Rico Dowdle early, because the benefit of like, if the Cowboys just don't draft someone occurs, then you get a huge value. And then even after the draft, no one came to the Cowboys. Dowdle became a huge value. But then
they signed Dalvin Cook. Didn't you hear that?
Yeah, they signed Dalvin Cook. So those are the types of contracts for like the young, underpriced backs that we'd love. But most of these teams won't sign Dalvin Cook. Only one team can sign Dalvin Cook. So we're going to be looking at a lot of
and we're drafting whoever their starter is on that team.
So the teams, because of how strong of a draft class and how weak a free agency class, it is scarier to be drafting heavily on an incumbent starter that then would face draft competition versus free agency, because the talent band on any free agent acquisition is pretty narrow. We have much more of an idea after 4 years in the NFL of how good these players are. Whereas with the draft, these players like Bucky Irving last year have the potential to greatly exceed expectations, usurp a mediocre starter. So I tried to think about who are the running backs that could be usurped. What would be the ADP impact purely on your draft capital of bringing in a new running back? And I think like the Bengals and the Buccaneers are good examples, like hold intention, because with Bucky Irving, they're a pretty low investment backfield, but Bucky gave them such strong returns. But most importantly, the talent moat, as we say with Bucky Irving, is so high that a third or fourth round pick in Tampa Bay would have to do so much to actually siphon touches away from Bucky Irving. Whereas in Cincinnati, Chase Brown was like perfectly fine last year, barely above average, like on everything you look at for the top 64 backs. But, you know, for starters, slightly below average. The Bengals probably don't want to run their entire offense with Chase Brown on the field every snap. They probably want someone better. Zach Moss is probably getting cut. They're a team where I see like another player entering the fray. And if that player cuts into Brown's workload a little, he's probably not a great third round pick. If that player is outright better than Brown, he could be like 12th through 15th round value that we're taking in the third round now. And then you also have to bounce the upside of like, what if this is Rico Dowdle of last year and no one else is brought in? Well, Rico Dowdle of last year on an offense we were excited about was going like the 16th round. And again, Brown absolutely smashed at the end of last year, and that is priced in, I think overly priced in, but that is something you have to keep in mind. Brown now going in the early third round. I think the downside case there is just so risky.
Yeah. So Chase Brown, we based on this, you're saying is the Bengals are more likely to add a running back than the Bucks, but it's close.
Yeah.
But the big difference is if they do add a running back, Chase Brown got there mostly on just an absurd volume,
Yeah.
accumulation of touches, whereas Bucky, it took until like the very end of the year for him to actually just be the dude. But he was awesome well before that because of how good of a runner he is. And so if he returns to, obviously if you're drafting him at like pick 24 or pick 25 and the Bucks draft a running back in the third round or the second round, you're going to be bummed. But there's like a decent chance, kind of like with Kyron Williams last year, where like that guy just doesn't make much noise, or James Conner, right? Where it's just like, nope, they just leaned on Bucky Irving again because he's better than the guy they drafted. Chase Brown's much more vulnerable if how good that running back has to be is just he doesn't have to be as good to make. Not that Brown was bad, but he never flashed like Irving flashed from a talent perspective. Let me ask you about some of the ones that jumped out to me as like, whoa, this seems surprising that there isn't more, or that this looks like a lot of investment. So let's start at the top. Buffalo. I completely agree with you about the Lions, but the Bills being number 2 was surprising to me. You had estimated an extension for James Cook. That's driving a decent amount of this 3-year extension worth $42 million. And that's like pretty similar to Brees Hall and Kyron Williams, although you seem more confident actually that Cook gets the deal than a Hall or a Williams.
Yes.
Why? So I guess talk me through that. Why are you more confident in James Cook getting an extension than Brees Hall or Kyron Williams?
So when I think about how teams want to approach the position, there's going to be some element of just what's the most recent thing you did, like a little bit of that bias coming in, but that's not the main argument. When I look at how the Bills have talked about James Cook, Sean McDermott said he's in our leadership council meetings in the morning. Then just if you could have stood next to me and heard him in that game, the way he was, what he was saying to me and how he was talking to me, it was even with the year he had, it was like he was on missile lock to be his build and to play as physical as he did. He was in another. I don't know if he was in flow state or he was just in another stratosphere. It was incredible. What a game he played. What a year he had. And that's a great example of these players. We really drafted him to be a pass catching running back, right? And he comes in and blossoms and just develops in more ways than one, on the field, off the field. And people around the Bills expect the extension to occur. And it's the same regime that drafted him, whereas with the Jets, you have a new regime coming in. The Rams, it's the same GM and coach for now, but there's a bit of risk of just what if they try and blow things up? Are you then eager to extend Kyron? I think they still probably are eager, but I'm quite confident the Bills extend Cook. He was awesome last year. Ray Davis was very solid last year as a backup. Then that RB3 spot's still up for grabs. It could be Ty Johnson brought back. They could draft someone late.
Ty Johnson's a free agent, which is yeah. But I don't know he's going to have much of a market outside of Buffalo. So it seems likely that they do just bring him back. I know Josh Allen is a big fan.
Yeah. So James Cook probably almost certainly going to be available. I feel quite confident in that. I think the Rams very likely try to extend Kyron, but the issue is Kyron, like a lot of his use case in fantasy is predicated on this. He has the trust of Stafford, that offense, Sean McVay. Kyron's case is not often predicated on, he's just this difference making talent in really any way that James Cook is. So I think, as we talked about, if another back comes in, how can they usurp the starting back? With James Cook and Ray Davis in hand, I think it's tougher to find the way for a new back, barring like Ashton Jeanty, to come in and become the one. Whereas with the Rams, if it's just super reliable, like gets to work every day, like 5 a.m., last one out, and is productive in that offense on a par with Kyron, but has fewer fumbles or some of the issues that have plagued him, like pretty ugly yards per carry, just aren't there. Kyron could get to 0 quickly. Again, I think it's unlikely, but that is a slight risk. And we think Cook still, with all that said, is probably still a little overvalued because the ceiling cases for James Cook are pretty tough to like get there. He's projecting 20 points a week.
He just led the NFL in touchdowns, and he was like an RB2. Like you heading into any given week, you're like, yeah, I'm happy to start Cook, but I'm not like super excited about it. He's not, he never, again, with a ton of touchdowns, he was never the guy where you're like, he's expensive and chalky and I'm eating the chalk. Like he never achieved that. Um, which you would like to have, like in the third round, you'd like that to be like possible, you know.
Mhm.
um, it's yeah. So this is more about safety, right?
Yeah.
That you have a good, uh, you know, more than 1A, but maybe not a workhorse, but a good starter and some efficient guys behind him. And maybe the trio is back together. Two of the three are under contract at least. Um, go to Carolina. They obviously just drafted Jonathan Brooks. They may not get anything from him though. Do you feel like maybe the model's slightly overvaluing how like invested this team is? Because they have to be looking at
Yeah.
running back 2 for next year and not feel very good about where they're at because Miles
Yeah.
Sanders is probably gone.
Yeah. So if they want to cut Miles Sanders to save, I think, close to $5 million in cap space and then just bring in a cheaper running back to be that running back too, I feel quite confident the Panthers know that their team needs a 1 year band aid at running back too. But looking long term, I think they probably hope that Jonathan Brooks and at least deserves a shot to be in that rotation with Hubbard, though 2026 or 2025 seems unlikely for him to be an impact player. So I think Hubbard is incredibly safe, but I would be expecting some player to come in and take the touches that they don't put onto Hubbard's plate. But I don't think we have a player that can like earn the touches that Hubbard rightfully will get.
It's also the type of class where the backs that really pass like Genty and Henderson. It's a lot of guys that are kind of like Hubbard. They're like more early down rushers. Not everybody, Scatabo, as I mentioned, is got that versatility. There are guys with some versatility. RJ Harvey could end up being more of like a third down explosion back. But it's a lot of guys where you're like, you're just best suited to back up Chuba Hubbard.
Mhm.
So I tend to agree that Hubbard is actually pretty safe. Um, Eagles, they Gainwell's a free agent. They may replace the Shipley role, but obviously Saquon's locked in. Atlanta looks pretty locked in. The 49ers maybe are a little less locked in my mind than you have it
Yeah.
here. Yeah, talk about that real quick.
So we have McCaffrey's extension, which they added 2 more years to it, which are in the model. But if his Achilles tendonitis just flares up, they'll have an out eventually. And if they know, crucially, they probably know where CMC's at health wise. So
Right.
if he's not trending the right way to ever being the player he was just a year ago, they might look to replace him. But they took Garendo last year in the fourth, and I don't think like Shanahan almost every other year. What it's Garendo, it's Tyrion Davis Price, it's Trey Sermon. So he does have a history of investing in these backs. He also has a history of not letting them onto the field in their first year. So I
Yeah.
feel pretty comfortable predicated on McCaffrey not having some setback as like the clear 1A, Garendo almost certainly going to be the other back in the rotation. I think Jordan Mason's a restricted free agent, so they'll probably keep him on like 1 year, $2.5–3 million deal if they want, but maybe the third spot's up for grabs. But unless McCaffrey gets hurt, I don't think his ADP is really at risk of moving off the 1-2 turn much.
Uh, the Packers look fairly set. The Cardinals look fairly set. Patriots, new regime. Ramondre not that great. Gibson not very good at this point. So this one feels like it's like, man, the last thing they should do is draft a running
Yeah.
back, but I could still see him doing it.
Yeah. I mean, this GM extended Ramondre, and it was a 4 year extension reported at the time, but it's 2 years, and after 2 years, they have zero dead cap to cutting him. So 2026 is almost certainly his last year on the team, unless he's just a markedly different player than we've seen. And I think the Saints fit similar. Like Alvin Kamara is uncuttable until after 2026. Like he will be on the roster this year, and unless they want to save $2 million, he's on the roster in 2026. They are truly like the last team that should be taking a running back in round 2 or 3.
Uh-huh.
But and I think they won't. I think the Patriots won't. I think those are teams that will probably have eyes on 2026 for fixing their running back position. But if you were to talk about teams like the starter is probably not in the top half of the league in terms of their ability, and the investment has a like finite end after the 2026 year, an investment isn't out of the realm of possibilities. But also when you look at their prices, I think the odds that Ramondre gets replaced by someone are less likely than the market's indicating. And then, we'll see what happens after the draft. But I think he's a fine pick now. I think Kamara's like pretty fine now because the Saints,
Yeah, Kamara's actually fine.
yeah, like we just have to like whisper it, but it would
Yeah,
be so
I think he's fine.
unconscionable for the Saints to spend meaningful draft capital at running back, because it's not like Kamara's returns were so terrible last year. They like worked out another extension or reworked a
Yeah, but I
contract.
mean, this team did like pay Taysom Hill an absurd amount of money. Like it's tricky when you're like, man, the Saints. It would be really bad use of the cap if they did this, right?
Yeah,
They would really
but
get themselves in a cap pickle if
don't
they
you
do
think
this.
they have to have some level of introspection, right? Like going into this
I
head
don't know,
coaching
man.
cert, like Joe Brady, who worked with the Saints for multiple years, just like, no, I'm staying in Buffalo. He might not ever get a coaching job. Mike McCarthy, like, should not ever get
Well,
another.
I don't think they wanted McCarthy. I think McCarthy kind of dumped them before they dumped
Yeah,
him.
but that's my point. That these coaches who probably won't have many more opportunities and might not ever have one are rejecting the Saints, like one of 32 teams offering you
Right.
like $5 to $15
But surely
million.
they've replaced the GM who got them into this mess, right? Mickey
Yeah,
Loomis isn't running thing. Oh wait. Oh wait.
yeah. So I
Uh,
mean, will Kellen Moore come in there and be like, we need to spend, or we cannot spend a third round pick on a running back? We'll see who has the
I
power
don't know,
there.
man. Kellen Moore seems to have found you know, rushing Jesus. He's pretty into running the ball right now. You know, I think where you have the Saints is it makes sense to me. Like they shouldn't draft a running back, but you know the investment in Kamara and what they're getting from Kamara is not really that great. The backup hasn't really worked out. I could see them uh, easily drafting a running back on day three, and
Yeah,
the
day
depth of
three.
this class maybe be you know kind of helping them out in that regard, or helping out with their plan. Maybe maybe
Yeah.
they'd be better off if it wasn't so deep.
Well, I
But
mean, I think
yeah,
it's one feather of it being deep is if a team decides they need a running back, they don't necessarily need to force the investment early. Like a
right.
lot of teams are just going to take day three backs, and we'll be sitting here like saying, oh, how could you do that? You have your three deep already. But with how many running backs are in this class that seem like true draftable players and potential rotational pieces, which is tough to find every year, they're just going to be teams taking those players. A few of them will hit in unexpected ways. Like, I mean, Bucky Irving's the true like case, but Tyler Algier a few years ago, the Falcons, like, what was that? After Mike Davis and Cordero Patterson, where they then bring
Yeah.
in Algier as a fifth rounder, and he has a really easy path to touches because he's a capable player.
Yeah. I think, I mean, a quick aside on the class again. I think the way the class is looking, I do think that we're going to see at least a couple early second rounders, if not, like assuming Genty's the only first round running back, I think we get a couple early second rounders. But it would not surprise me, even if a guy like Caleb Johnson, I don't expect this, but like I think it's possible that a guy like Caleb Johnson were to fall to the third. Judkins could fall to the third. Um, because of like how deep it is, right?
Mhm.
You're like, man, we were pretty psyched to take Caleb Johnson, but we have Amari and Hampton higher on our board, and so we're just going to take him. We didn't think he'd be here, or you know, whatever it is. Maybe Hampton falls because someone likes Johnson better, and Hampton's available in the early third all of a sudden. Um, by the same token, I think you're going to look at early day three, you know, round four, round five, I think we get a bunch of running backs taken, but there's so many running backs that we're going to see guys fall to round 6 and 7 that we were thinking about as potential fourth round picks. I don't know that we should crush those guys as much as we normally might. You know, there's probably a Pacheco in this class as a seventh round pick, and I think there's probably a couple UDFA's that are going to at least be, you know, guys we're keeping an eye on as kind of priority waiver ads at the very least, and potentially guys that, you know, during training camp, we're like, okay, this guy's looking very likely to make the roster.
Mhm.
He's now super draftable in the 18th round of Best Ball Mania. But it does, you know, there's going to be some pain on draft night for us, I think, with some of these. The class is so deep that it feels impossible that a guy we are excited about going fourth round doesn't fall out of the draft completely, you know,
Yeah.
or a guy that we're excited about in the second round doesn't fall to day 3. Like it's just like it's never as clean as we kind of imagine it to be.
Yeah, but their teams were just you're really hoping you're overweight on the back that goes. Like the Chicago Bears feel incredibly strongly that they're just adding a back in the draft. They have 2
Right.
second round picks, one from the Panthers and their own. Ben Johnson, someone in that Detroit Lions apparatus hated DeAndre Swift. I assume the feeling was probably
I don't
decently
think it
widespread.
was Ben Johnson loving him. You know,
Yeah.
he seemed quite happy to call plays for other people.
Yeah. So the Bears are probably going to be looking to replace DeAndre Swift once, possibly 2 times over. And then Swift's ADP, I don't think really has corrected to the near lock of competition being brought in that the team will want to give more. And then on that point of like the backs, that they're just landing spots where even if they're a UDFA, you're going to want to be interested and hope they make the roster. When I think of the Houston Texans right now, like Joe Mixon and James Conner have the same contract where there's an out after this year to save $8 million. And there's a chance those players play well enough to play into 2026, but teams probably will not expect that at more than like a 50% likelihood. The Texans have Dameon Pierce on the final year of his deal. It's unclear how they feel about him. They seem extremely live when we talk about the teams like
It's somewhat clear. It's at least they don't love him.
Yeah. When we think about the teams to just like take the day 2, especially round 2 running back, quote unquote, out of nowhere, I think the Texans are one of those teams. I think the Bengals are one of those teams where just they got
Texans second round running back feels like super live to me. That's not it's probably not the best move, but
like the story I'm telling myself of the Texans being incredibly fed up with their offensive line coach and offensive coordinator. Again, part of it's the personnel on the offensive line, just like leading the league in penalties there. But there's some animosity that D'Amico Ryans felt like firing Bobby Slowick, who largely chose to run that offense through Joe Mixon to not a great degree of success. This was Mixon was projecting for 20 points and D'Amico Ryans was probably seething at most of those touches. It was excessive. And I think that even if it's not a round 2 or 3 back, the chance of like that round 4 or 5 back being a real thorn in his side and potentially able to earn a share of the backfield. I don't think Mixon would get outright benched. He was too good last year. But I think Mixon's price is like, oh yeah, we're running back the running back room of Joe Mixon and player that our coach hates in the same touch share. And I think that if they basically run that back, like say it's a round 6 ad, Mixon probably only moves up a few spots and then he becomes a more interesting pick. But the chance of like a round 2 or round 3 pick that probably should go at or near where Joe Mixon, like he and Mixon should probably go similar, isn't fully factored in. And
yeah, we're starting to get to the territory of like landmines where the bet fundamentally changes.
yeah,
Right. If you add Caleb Johnson to the Texans backfield, the bet on Mixon is different. It is not at all the bet we're making now. Whereas I think people probably are more thinking with the Joe Mixon. Yeah, maybe they add Damian Martinez or Khalil Mullings or something, but it's not going to be something where I'm shaking in my boots to have drafted Joe Mixon, in the 3rd or 4th round. And most likely that is what will happen. It's it's not like they're really really strong to draft a running back high, but what if in the 3rd round Judkins is there? That's a team I could very much see adding because the commitment to Mixon isn't very long term. This is a team that I do think wants to run the ball, even if maybe they ran it too much last year. Let me ask you quickly about the Seahawks because they're like, if we get, they're in like sort of their own tier here on this chart where maybe not a ton of like true landmine potential, but not super safe. And if you asked me like, Pat, like just off the top of your head, rank these teams, I would have had the Seahawks safer than this, given Kenneth Walker they invested in has been solid. Zach Charbonnet, when given the chance, has been really good. One of the best backups in the league, and they spent a 2nd round pick on him. So like this backfield set, surely they won't add anything, but you have them as potential to add someone. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think with Charbonnet, 2 years left on a 2nd round rookie contract, Walker 1 year left. They're almost certainly going to extend one of those 2 players. I think the Seahawks internally probably have an idea of who gets extended, but I think it's tough to like prognosticate. Do they think Walker's the like leader in that backfield for 3-4 more years? Do they think it can be Charbonnet's? And then it potentially Walker's final year with the team. So they were a little tough to account for. I put 50, just under 50% for the probability of Walker getting a decent extension. But I wouldn't be too worried of like the back they add, because I think Walker and Charbonnet both possess like certain trump cards that it would be difficult for one back like be better than one of them in a way to capture touches. But I don't think it's a true safety. Like, and maybe in my mind, again, this isn't factored into the model, but just in my mind, knowing they had Walker, then second round pick on Charbonnet, and just a demonstrated history of valuing this position. Hiring Clint Kubiak, I think, makes running back more of a priority than like had they kept Ryan Grubb. So I think they're a little tough on the parts. I think the market generally has their prices correct, though. I think Walker,
I do too. Yeah. I'm
yeah,
not afraid of this one. I get what you're saying that like, the investment isn't actually as much as it might feel like cuz the contracts we're well into the contracts at this point, but yeah, we'll get more into your thoughts on kind of what's priced in and what's not shortly here, but
mm-hmm.
I think generally this one is fairly well priced.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we talked a number of these teams. The Ravens look like they could actually add somebody, and the Colts look like they could add somebody. Those are fairly similar situations because you've got an early down guy who is coming off a extremely good year in the case of Derrick Henry and a good year in the case of Jonathan Taylor, um, but they don't really catch passes. In the Colts case, you mentioned they don't really have an RB2. It's currently Ahmed. The Ravens do have Justice Hill, and they've got some other guys behind Henry that they can kind of mix in, but not a ton invested there. Is Hill under contract
Yeah,
for
they
next year?
extended
Okay,
him, but Henry has
okay.
just the 1 year left. The Ravens internally,
And
again,
Henry's quite old. He's, I believe, going to be 31 this year. So if you're planning out, in some ways, like the success of Henry makes you think, hey, this is pretty cool. When we put a really good rusher next to Lamar Jackson, good things happen. What if we make sure that we have that in the future? So, they Henry's not going to get displaced, I don't think, by even like a Caleb Johnson, a Hampton. I think would just back him up for most of the year, and maybe if Henry were to get banged up, they have a chance to emerge. But that would be almost a landmine in many ways for that rookie
yeah.
back as opposed to Henry. And I feel the same way about Taylor.
When
But these are second round picks in fantasy. So if they were to get a Devin Neal or something where you're like, hey, he's mixing in on passing downs and he's running pretty well. This is now a bit more of a committee than we were hoping with these guys in the second round. It's not like true landmine, but there's a high risk of something that would be pretty annoying for these guys going in the second round. Is that how you're seeing it?
Yeah, when I think of the Ravens, Derrick Henry was much better than Mark Ingram was in 2019. And again, you talked about like the landmine there actually being the running back, but when Dobbins went there in the second round, he had to be like a top 3 back in the NFL from the jump to like earn a lot of touches. And Ingram wasn't anywhere close to the player that Derrick Henry was last year. So I
Right.
think that just Henry is good enough. And the Ravens internally, the way they think about extending players would not surprise me if they wait till after the year or just tack on one more year to Henry's contract, but I wouldn't be that worried with him because of just what the Derrick Henry bet is predicated on. Again, I'm not sure that bet is worth a top 14 pick in drafts. And then with Taylor, I think his ADP is really at risk of falling because we already know he's not an every down player. And I think the market is just pretending like insert player at RB2 to just like fill the RB2 role. But if they spend around 3, I think round 2 is pretty unlikely, but round 3, round 4 pick, and that player is anything exceeding those expectations, he could easily eat into Taylor's workload. And with Ballard and Steichen, if they don't, the playoffs is probably the easy barometer of if they don't do that, they're not there next year. So all the incentives that they have will be on just playing the players that maximize their chance to win games. Whether that player is better than Taylor in the aspects that Taylor's not deficient at is unlikely, but his ADP almost to me assumes there's really no chance of that ad coming, which I think is wrong.
And he would be someone that like if a RJ Harvey were to go there in round 4, like that would be pretty annoying. I think because Harvey is an explosive back, and can catch passes, and so it's like he's got a Nyheim Hines situation again.
Yeah,
I don't
and
think we would love that given where we're at with the Colts offense. Like we're not that excited about this Colts offense.
yeah, and last year Kyron Williams was a bit earlier in round 2 than Taylor was, but then they spent a third round pick on Blake Corum, and that immediately shoots Kyron's ADP down around. So I think that the
Right.
risk of Taylor just becoming a mid third round pick for fundamentally the same bet, the Colts will add another running back to be capable of like taking touches, likely in the pass down role. That is going to happen. The moment that happens, I think it's hard to imagine his ADP really increasing. Like he's not going to be a round 1 pick. Could he be
Mm-hmm.
a round 3? Could he be a round 4 pick if that's a round 3 back, or very unlikely a round 2 back? But I think Taylor can get cut after this year. Like we remember that contract saga from pretty recently, but I think that they have a not crazy out on that one, and just I think that none of that downside is factored in.
Yeah, after the 2025 season, he has a 15.5 or $15.6 million cap hit, which is the same cap hit he has this year. And not really that outrageous for him,
Yeah,
but only 2.5 million in dead cap. So, yeah, they can save 13 million by releasing him after the year or maybe by trading him. I think you could have like a teardown situation. I think it would probably maybe be a trade.
mid-season
But
trade if like GM there's new coach firing. There are a lot of
yeah,
outcomes I think for the Colts to be just a team you might not want pieces of,
like a clean house situation.
yeah, and I
Like
think especially
yeah,
in the middle of round 2 before the offseason addition, which is inevitable to come, has actually arrived. It's sort of I'm trying to think like when we think about suspensions in the NFL, like most of the time where it's just like player is 95% plus to get suspended, suspension announced, ADP moves, or some
right,
injury announcements,
right.
just things like that where I feel very confident that the ADP is wrong and all the information is basically out there, or at least the range of additions.
It's hard to see his ADP moving up, is I
Yeah.
think the best way to put it. All right, let's talk Jets. We talked a little bit about the fact that Gentry's mocked there at all, not great. A
They were
new
going to take
coaching
Jahmyr
staff,
Gibbs. If Jahmyr Gibbs was there with the Jets, he would have been a Jet that year. So it's a different management now.
right?
So, but again, you talked about I think the stat in the Zerline article of Brees has never rushed for 1,000
It'd be
yards.
such a weird fit. Where like Brees is actually he's the Gibbs, like it would almost make more sense to pair him with a Hampton or something. I don't know, but yeah, you're right. I mean, the commitment to Hall has never been super strong, and when you look at why he's here, like why is Hall down here? You said we're looking at similar extensions for him and James Cook, and yet you got Cook or the Bills number 2 on this list, and the Jets are like big time landmine potential, but that is driven by the inputs to the model based on the skill level, right?
Yeah.
And you've got Brees Hall coming off an efficient pass catching season, but the rushing efficiency wasn't there. Braylon Allen had really poor rushing efficiency this past year, despite kind of looking good. He did not rate well, and like rush yards over expected. I don't think Isaiah Davis was particularly efficient. So that the Jets with a new coaching staff might be looking to get more out of the run game. Is that kind of why they're down here?
Yeah. And I mean, Hall's had the 2-3 turn. I think some of the risk is priced in there. But if they just a new management, so the investment in players of a previous regime, I think intuitively should be lower. If someone doesn't like, make an investment themselves, they'll probably feel less attached
Right.
to it.
Right.
So the fact that
Someone else's investment you're going to value lower than your own.
yeah, like Ben Johnson comes to Chicago, he sees a contract that Ryan Poles made on DeAndre Swift. I think he sees it more as a sunk cost, even though they're now managing the same
Yeah,
team,
for
and is
sure.
willing to say my offense is not giving more than 2 touches a game to DeAndre Swift. Brees Hall has so many like moments of demonstrated talent that I think it is tougher, though not impossible, to imagine a Genty or even a round 2 player coming to really compete for touches there. But it's something I don't think his ADP would move much after the draft, and there's the slight landmine there, but I'm
It
not.
would move. It would move. He would go. I think he would be more in like the fourth, like
Or
the 3-4 turn kind of
I'm saying
range.
if there's no addition of like the
Oh,
his upside, is he more than like the 22nd or 21st pick?
it depends on quarterback. It
Okay.
depends on the quarterback. I think he could move up into the mid second. Um, maybe even early second, probably more mid second if they were to get a like. It depends on who the quarterback is and how
Yeah.
confident we are. Just given the quarterback options, probably doesn't move up past like the mid second, maybe even mid to late second. Just being realistic about who their quarterback is. So he doesn't have a ton of room to rise, but yeah, he could definitely fall. He could definitely fall. He could be
Yeah.
more like a fourth round pick.
That that would be one where like holding our breath a little. Another one where
Totally.
like if you're drafting a lot, is
But one thing with Hall is that the pass catching uh, does look to be there. I'm confident in his ability as a pass catcher, which gives you a little bit more of a floor than like with Taylor. I'm fine with Taylor going ahead of him in ADP right now, but I'm just I'm more comfortable drafting Hall where he goes than I am drafting Taylor where he goes because of
yeah.
that pass catching ability.
Yeah, and then looking at the rest of the list, I think like the only other early drafted running back is Devon Chan in Miami. I think that's a really bad AP. Like,
Yeah, talk through that one because the Dolphins really probably should not be drafting a running back early. They have a ton of needs at offensive line, and this is actually a pretty deep class at like guard.
yeah.
You can find lots of guards here, so they should probably just draft like 3 guards to open the draft. Right? They
Yeah.
got to fix the offensive line. So, um,
hmm
if they spend a second round pick on Travion Henderson, it's such a waste of draft capital. But you're kind of identifying them here as a team where that's like at least plausible.
Yeah. When I think of the thing I'm most confident in, it's if the Dolphins go into after the draft with this running back room, Achane's still a 1-2 turn pick at most. He's not like getting anything up unless every single draft pick the Dolphins have is spent on the offensive line, which is just
Right.
so unlikely given their other needs. So you're probably buying almost at the upside outcome. And that is probably like the modal outcome, the thing that's most likely to happen. But Achane was so poor as a rusher last year. So like it would not surprise me if the Dolphins, I think Jacob Sanderson wrote a piece about this last offseason and the Jalen Wright pick of just this offense is so predicated on a functional running game due to their passing game limitations. Like they are willing to invest more in that Jalen Wright type that I think they made the Jalen Wright investment already. Raheem Mostert probably not in the roster. So maybe like they sprinkle a late day 3 pick on the RB3. Or what if they're just like reconfiguring the room? They like Jalen Wright as a few touches a game. They like Achane as like this receiving, like jetpack player, but a player that's not really capable of efficiently handling more than 4 to 8 carries a game. What if they just want
Right.
a
Maybe he
player?
drops weight again.
Yeah,
It's like, hey, remember when you were extremely fast? Let's try that again.
yeah. What if the Dolphins just say, we want Achane to get 4 to 8 carries, but then probably 4
Right.
to 8 targets a game in a very good niche role, but just they have a different lead back on the ground, a different goal line player. I think that would be the role where you're worried. And I think it's very unlikely that were to happen. But when that happens, I think his ADP could absolutely crater because he was just
I do
not.
not think it's unlikely that they bring in a goal line back. There's a
Yeah.
bunch of goal line type backs in this class. Like Mullings, Martinez would be 2 guys that I mean, like Mullings gets downhill in a hurry. I think he'd be pretty interesting as it's like the Raheem Mostert type.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't. Yeah, I think Achan's ADP it puts him in pretty risky zone where
Mhm.
he got there a lot on volume last year. Like he was a lot more like Chase Brown than I think people realize.
Especially
Not
in the running game, which I think that
in
role
the
is
running
very
game.
at
Yeah,
risk of like, what do you
yeah.
win?
He's a good receiver. So in
Yeah.
that sense, but I'm like, hey, I get the receiving floor with Brees Hall. That makes me more comfortable drafting him at like an early third round price. But Achan's an early second round pick.
Yeah.
And
And you have some quarterback stability there that you don't with the Jets. Like the downside quarterback outcome
sure,
isn't really in play with the Dolphins
that's a
unless
good
it's
point.
full on offensive collapse.
Well, it is. I mean, it is. Let's be
I think
honest. Like it
I think
is.
they'll I think they're pretty likely to invest in that quarterback too to try and like preemptively anticipate another Tua injury, like God forbid. But again, that's not a guarantee. But I think you're just what do you win when you win before these landmines? Like you're walking through an area of warfare. Like the landmines can go off. What do you win with A chain already in hand? You probably win one pick of ADP value at most. But what do you stand to lose? You stand to lose rounds of ADP value. So if you're trying to like build out a portfolio from now through September, like God, it's crazy. We'll like be drafting for six
Yeah.
plus months.
what do you think of this though? I mean, you'll never have a chance to get a lot of these rookies at the prices you're getting them at now because we don't know where they're going to go. And so
Yeah.
like you're getting potentially a guy in, you know, one of these round 2 running backs, let's say Judkins. Let's say like all the pessimism on Judkins I've shared, none of it comes to fruition and he goes to the Bears in the early second round. You're not getting him anywhere near where you've been getting him. And unfortunately, you don't have a single share of Achan in the big board, and they don't draft a running back. So,
Yeah.
like, wouldn't you? This is a different tournament than Best Ball Mania. And so, from a portfolio standpoint, you could argue like I'm not going to take any Achan here. I'm going to wait, and attack him later. But you might not have him at all in the big board if you do that, and that comes with some issues because of how much the rest of the prices are going to change.
Yeah, and there is an element of risk tolerance there and how big your portfolio is. But I think like the
Yeah,
running backs that are, I think Kyron Williams is pretty unlikely to meaningfully change in ADP. Whereas I think you tell me stories about like the Bengals bring in a Judkins type or a player capable of taking over for Chase Brown. The Dolphins bring in like just a goal line specialist type that can then occasionally mop up like short yardage carries in games that can really crater Chain's ADP. So I think they're players that not going to total zeros, but trying to like be wary of because there are like
yeah.
safer
I'm really
bets.
not into Achan right now, but if he were to fall to me, in the mid second, I'd happily draft him there. There's
Mhm.
like a kind of a tier. Like I want CMC over him, and as risky as CMC is, like he's like it's just pretty easy to see uh how he like pays off that ADP in a massive way. You could argue HN is a similar type of player, but I don't know. The efficiency that he brought to the table last year in that workhorse role was so bad that it's harder for me to believe in him as like pulling off the McCaffrey archetype, I guess. Um, and the offensive line there and everything is so rough. Let's talk Jacksonville because I think they're probably the last team. Actually, two teams: Jacksonville and the New York Giants. There's probably the. Actually, let me throw one more in there: the Chiefs, because the rest of the teams are like they just don't have it. Like
Yeah.
Rico Dowd. PSA: Rico Dowdle is a free agent. Stop drafting him like he's the Cowboys starting running back, and just running back the role that he had last year. He should be like Rico Dowdle should be in like the 150s. Like we don't know where he's playing if he even has a backup job. But you've got the Chiefs, their starter pretty uncertain, but Pacheco will be under contract next year. You got the Jaguars. They actually have two guys, ETN and Bigsby, who are both under contract next year, but probably looking to get more out of the running back position. Although Liam Cohen has talked about both
Yeah.
guys, getting a lot of carries. And then the Giants, you got Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary, both under contract for next year, but neither one of those guys particularly efficient. And so, like, they're kind of interesting because the Chiefs are a little bit of a different case. The Jaguars and the Giants are teams where if you're just kind of thinking through it quickly, you're like, yeah, neither of those teams need to add a running back, but you have them as both like extremely live to add a running back. How nervous are you about the incumbents there?
So with the Jaguars, I was really hoping like, to open the offseason, ETN would have a top 75 ADP, and then it would be just such an easy fade of the backfield ad isn't priced in. I think the
Yeah,
Jaguars are priced closer to the downside. Like Gretch said this on pod, like Travis Etienne, if they bring in, say, like a third round back or sign some
Travis
veteran
Etienne
in.
is priced pretty well if he is a backup.
Yeah,
Like if he's backing up Amarian Hampton, like cool.
that's
I
fine.
think
Yeah.
I think his price is fine.
Yeah, and Bigsby, it's like gonna be tough to parse how this new regime fully values each of them. But in Cohen's comments, he talked about like targeting Brian Thomas and giving carries and touches to ETN and Bigsby. I would have hoped that like that inflated their ADPs 3 rounds, so then they could be fades. But it's not priced in at all. I think the Jaguars are live to add that back, but sort of like Rico Dowdle last year. Just if that back isn't brought in, we're looking at ETN
Yeah,
stuff having a meteoric rise and Bigsby probably as well. So I think those are like just such clear. You can buy a Jaguars back, Lawrence, Brian Thomas, and just be like, well, what if they don't add? Which I think is very much on the table, even though they're low investment, because Trent Baalke declined Travis Etienne's 5th-year option. So we have zero knowledge about how Liam Cohen and the new front office will feel about ETN. they probably will want to pick their own guy. But in a sense, this is like the trial run for ETN to be their guy. This is a Bigsby trial
Yeah.
run that I think they're going to get work. I don't understand those prices. I think they should be a little higher. And then on the Giants front, Singletary will be cut after this year. Will save just a preposterous amount of money for what.
After this year, though,
Yeah,
he'll be there in 2025.
yeah,
Yeah.
but for what Singletary didn't bring to the table last year, saving $5 million is basically a no-brainer. He got outplayed by Tyrone Tracy, like 5th-round pick, and you probably have some nice fond memories of Tracy. His advanced numbers in like no area, rushing grade, rushing yards over expected, even receiving grade, blocking grade, none of them were above average. So this is just a clear. The Giants have so many needs, and I think their general manager generally understands the positional value of it all, and they weight their picks accordingly. So I think round 2 back is pretty unlikely. Once you start getting into round 3, round 4, round 5, round 6, a back probably does get added to this rotation. And it didn't take that much for Tracy to outplay Singletary. I think it's maybe slightly tougher for the new back to outplay Tracy, but it's certainly within that realm. And I think, again, with a back probably coming of ambiguous talent, it's tough to stomach Tracy in the top 75 picks. Like you want to talk, same with Isaiah Pacheco in that 7th round. A back, at least one, is coming to Kansas City, probably 2, to just give them a healthier rotation.
Pacheco's ADP is I can't get my head around it.
Yeah,
he has been replaced. Like there's a game on Sunday that the Chiefs are in. That Pacheco's not going to be the starter functionally for.
Like, surely
the goal line, they're going to be leaning on Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, surely the player that replaced Isaiah Pacheco wasn't like a 2017 pick that's bounced around the league for the past 5 years. Like it doesn't make any sense. That feels like the easiest fade of, maybe just maybe the Chiefs like run it back with Pacheco and Hunt and like a 7th round pick. And maybe then he's a fine 7th round pick.
Like, he'd be a fine 7th round pick because you go, okay, well, he wasn't healthy. All right. It's just unfair to him. Sure. But he might be healthy next year backing up a rookie addition. He might be backing up Travion Henderson or something. Like
he might be backing up multiple rookie additions. Like, it is not far-fetched to see him like basically phased out. Like, it's terrible. Like
he was a 7th round pick who just became a 0 in the playoffs. Like this feels more like Kadarius Toney, than it like if we think about what the plans are for this player next year. Like getting phased out in a Super Bowl run is bad. That is not a good sign for your next year viability. I don't know. I really do not understand Pacheco's ADP at all.
Yeah, it's the rosy case is like at his ADP now, and the downside case is maybe a 15th through 18th round flyer. And
yeah, totally.
When you price a player at the ceiling, it's an easy fade. But I think there are a lot of fun opportunities. And the Steelers, Jalen Warren's like a nice one to touch on. Of backs almost certainly added, but I think Warren's capable of outplaying them. I think his ADP has like a little room to gain positively.
All right. I was trying to avoid the Steelers because I thought you were going to break my heart with them definitely adding someone and Jalen Warren never getting his chance. But
they are. But
go on.
What is the bet on the player predicated upon? Warren's bet is largely a talent-based bet with a receiving role locked down. So I think that even if they add like
one of the best pass blockers in the game, he'll be out there.
A 3rd round pick or maybe a 4th round pick is probably the median. Can Warren like keep what he's had and then extend maybe 10 to 20% more touches? Yeah, absolutely. So I think again, his ADP could fall if like they took Najee Harris a few years ago. If they spend another 1st or 2nd round pick, then it's tough to justify the 7th round price tag on Warren. But
yeah, you need with Warren, you're hoping for some of the guys I've admitted, like you're hoping for a Martinez or a Mullings, like you're like an early down, like a pure early down guy. The guy more likely though, you are going to deal with like a Devin Neal or something like that, and then you have to hope that the guy's just not that good. So I don't think Warren is a smash right now.
I don't either. But
he's more like Dowdle, where you're kind of like, oh, mix him in, and maybe I hit like a home run, where there really isn't that much competition. They'll add somebody, but there might not be like that much competition. In terms of someone like just taking the Najee role, because I think that's where people are probably the easiest thing to think is like there will be a Najee. But there might not be a Najee. There might be someone who's like he's kind of taking some of the Najee role, and then someone gets a piece of the Najee role, which would be a pretty nice win at this price. Real quick, because I got to run in a few minutes, but I just wanted to kind of show off the rest of this article. you broke these down into tiers. We talked through a number of these teams already in terms of the safety, and then you dive into your thoughts on each of these backfields. So highly recommend people go and check the rest of this out. Um, we talked through a number of these already. Anyone else? The Commanders we didn't really talk
Yeah,
through.
that if I just had to briefly touch on, I think Brian Robinson, like who's a touch and consolidation predicated bet, is priced as if he'll be able to consolidate the touches.
Yeah,
I'd like to wait until after the draft because I don't think his ADP will move. Like maybe it moves up a little, but then he could
it
become
won't.
like
It won't move up much.
then it's the same bet as last year, right? If no one else is added besides maybe a seventh round pick, it's just like, sweet, I can bet on a player now, a known good offense versus like a what if the
Yeah.
offense is good. So I think he's one that I'd like to be able to target, but I want to know for sure that they don't take like a Devin Neal in round 3 or a different type of back, or God forbid a like round 2 back that just could completely take over that backfield, which I think isn't fully far fetched. Though I
In
do
a lot
price
of
him.
ways, I think Robinson is a good like framework for this whole exercise where you're like, if you're drafting Brian Robinson, you really want to know he's got the role. You
Mhm.
know, like he's just an, this year. I'm watching them against the Eagles, and it's like, well, here's here's Austin Eckler. Here's Chris Rodriguez. Here's Jeremy McNichols. Like he's just not out there all the time, and he's coming off a good season. I think they kind of value him. It's not like being phased out or he's not in the doghouse, but they just don't use him all the time. And this is before they potentially add anyone else. So the ceiling just does not really feel like it's there. He's a two down committee runner. Like, man, if you're telling me there's a low floor and the upside is two down committee runner in a good offense, but still two down committee runner, let me just wait. Let me
Yeah.
just wait and see what happens if I'm actually getting that, you
Yeah,
know?
patience is a virtue, and there are a lot of these players where just you might say, I want to be overweight in this player. I would love to be overweight on Brian Robinson, but the Brian Robinson I want to be overweight on isn't competing with a round 2 Caleb Johnson. And I just would
Yeah.
like to know, given like teams with new manner, like general managers, again, Brian Robinson by every account seems like an awesome hard worker, the guy you want to extend and almost certainly do extend or plan to extend, but you don't need to like make that assumption. Oh, well, he's definitely their lead back. The NFL through this offseason will tell you who the lead backs are more often than not. Like,
Yeah.
are you taking a round 2 back? Like DeAndre Swift. I mean, DeAndre Swift is one where I'm just assuming that the Bears are just like, no, this is not our back. Ben Johnson's going to, with 2 second-round picks, make a day 2 or
The
early.
Bears have 2 second round picks. Like DeAndre Swift, go do something else on day 2 of the draft. Don't be in front of the TV. I don't think it's going to go
Yeah.
very well.
So there are a few situations where I'm like mentally preparing for a back to get replaced, but generally you want to
Yeah.
think about the downside outcome, the upside outcome, and try and think about where the price is. Like we're looking at Jonathan Taylor with the Colts there and Brian Robinson, where it's hard for me
Yeah.
to envision purely on like the ADP side, the upside ADP outcome of like you took 20% Taylor now, you dodged a landmine. Congrats, you moved from like 19.7 to 18.8. You're not winning that much. And I think Robinson's similar. Just you stand to lose more than you can gain.
I think so too. Yeah. Um the Bucks is an interesting one because we talked through Bucky's going to probably have a better chance of like he's in this risky bucket, but he can actually hold the job even if he
Yeah.
gets blown up a little bit. Um, any like I guess let's talk through just real quick some of these backfields with nobody on it. So Broncos, I actually think this should be in what is dead may never die because they don't really have anybody.
I mean, they have
But
2 players that I think are going to get 2 to 8 touches a game next year. It's just where are
okay.
the rest of the touches going? Like when you look at every
Right.
team here, J.K. Dobbins, like are people drafting as if J.K. Dobbins is on the Chargers? I think there's a little bit of that. Whereas the rest of the teams, I mean, Rico Dowdle, like they don't have bodies. They need
They don't
multiple
have
warm
anybody.
bodies. That's like
Raiders, Vikings.
the to-do
But
list. Yeah.
what do you think like cuz when we do this exercise or when we think through the draft every year, teams like the Raiders, they always get Omarion Hampton. And the Vikings, they get Caleb Johnson. And, the Cowboys drafted Genty in the first. And the Chargers, drafted Travion Henderson, you know, like we fill in, but that's not how it's going to happen. So like, what are your thoughts on, I guess what I'm asking is Najee Harris actually a pretty good pick?
Yeah.
Because not every one of these teams will draft a running back, and instead, one of them could easily sign Najee Harris. And
Yeah. And
I am
with,
not someone who normally touts Najee Harris, but Najee Harris, the sole running back on any of these teams, is pretty good. Maybe not the Chiefs would be a little different, but these teams, Broncos, Browns, Chargers, Cowboys, Raiders, Vikings, Najee Harris RB1 seems like a pretty awesome value where he's currently going.
yeah, I think nearly all of the upside to Najee is not priced in. I think he's such, and we touch on this in the article and in the ranks. Like you can see on Legendary Upside, it's just these teams are going to look at free agency in the draft, and it only takes one team. It only takes one team to not feel comfortable going into the draft with Ty Chandler and no one else. Again, I don't think it's the Vikings with how they generally approach the position. They gave Jones 1 year, $7 million last year, and Najee, I think, is commanding 2 to 3 years for at least 10 a year. Like the Raiders, if you just want to guarantee a functional running back in your revamped offense of like, we want functional players at as many positions as possible. Najee Harris may not be a lot of things. He is absolutely a functional player.
He's functional.
A team will pay
$10
to $13 million. And then if that player then escapes the draft, so like there's a bit of the two parts of Najee.
Yeah, it's a little part. It's a bit of a parlay. Yeah.
Where because you then need Najee to either displace someone or land in like this tier 7 of rooms where it's just there's no one to displace. But then you're like, okay, now that you've signed Najee, don't spend that round 2 pick. But even like Najee and a round 4 pick, which I think feels like a fine median outcome, you're probably taking Najee in the 7th round at least.
I mean, honestly, you might be taking him higher than that. Like my thing with Najee is I will not draft him in the 5th round. I will not, right? I'm not doing Najee Alexander Madison. I'm not doing Najee Miles Sanders.
On the Chiefs.
Like, I'm not doing like he and what I mean is like when Alexander Madison was priced in the 5th round because he was the only back on the Vikings, or when Miles Sanders was priced in the 5th, 6th because he was the guy in Carolina. Like I don't make that bet. That's a gross bet. I will draft someone else. I'll draft tight end, receiver, running back that's not Najee Harris, or tight end, wide receiver, or quarterback is what I was going for. It's a situation where because I don't want to do that though, I don't want to put my head in the sand on the value that he currently offers, right? Mm-hmm. Like in some ways, because I know I will not draft Najee Harris when he's a 5th rounder if everything breaks his way, shouldn't I be open to taking him now at a big discount? And I mean, I'm more than open. I'm pretty into it. Yeah. When you draft Najee Harris around pick 100, it's tilted to the upside. It's tilted to the upside right now. So I completely agree he's a target. You could even say Aaron Jones is a target, but he goes like way above Najee, and I don't really get that. So the rest of the free agent class, I don't have a ton of interest in. But Najee's being drafted like he's back on the Steelers, and he's not.
Yeah, and Najee's contract projection is 25% higher than Jones's. You're probably looking at more years of commitment. So I think it's really tough to understand how the market's getting there unless there's just some element of the team you last played for is the team that's most likely to assign you. But the team that Najee most recently played for declined his 5th-year option. They are almost certainly not the team that's going to bring him back.
He could be back, but it's just he could, it's likely he's gone.
And even if he's brought back, the 10th round or 9th round is not, dare I say, like
an
awful price for that player. Yeah. So I don't see what you stand to lose. And like Chiefs are like the true nut outcome. And if that happens, the 5th round's almost certainly justified. And he probably goes earlier than that.
Yeah, even like the Broncos would be awesome. They have a great offensive line. There's very little else there.
Am I back?
Yeah, I can hear you. And so I think you could. Yeah, there's a number of destinations where I'd like Najee. All right, your internet's breaking up a little, and I got to run. So let's call it for now. Everyone, check out Daniel's article in Legendary Upside. Just an excellent piece. Goes through his methodology, breaking down. How he came up with the scores that we went through in detail. We've got big board rankings over on Legendary Upside. The Sidekick is live for the big board. We got a sale going for the big board. If you're wanted to check it out for the monthly, that's only $99 right now. $4.99 for the yearly, which is an excellent deal if you're going to be using it through the summer, and for playoff best ball, which is also included. But we'll be back tomorrow, me and Daniel, doing a draft, showing off the sidekick a little bit as we draft a big board team. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and good luck avoiding the running back landmines.